The great chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with the familiar sounds of 1,000 different species conducting the business of civilization. Translator units hummed softly as they converted the clicks, whistles, and harmonics of various alien languages into something resembling universal understanding. The massive circular hall, carved from a single asteroid and polished to mirror perfection, reflected the light of distant stars through its transparent dome. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat quietly in the human delegation section, her dark eyes scanning the assembly with an expression that had grown increasingly distant over the past several cycles. Beside her, Ambassador Marcus Rivera tapped his fingers against the smooth surface of their shared desk, a nervous habit that the other species had learned to recognize as distinctly human. The third member of their delegation, Dr. Elena Vasquez, reviewed data on her tablet with mechanical precision. The current debate centered on mining rights in the Kepler sector, a discussion that had been raging for 3 standard months. The Zephyrians wanted exclusive access to the rare Earth deposits, claiming their technological superiority made them the logical choice. The Crystalline Collective argued for shared distribution based on population need. The Void Hunters, as always, remained silent but imposing in their dark corner of the chamber. "The humans have been remarkably quiet lately," whispered Counselor Vexahai to his aide, a gesture that in Andromedan culture indicated mild concern. The insectoid species had always prided themselves on reading the subtle social currents that flowed through the council chambers. It was true. For the past 12 sessions, the human delegation had spoken only when directly addressed, and even then, their responses had been brief, factual, and strangely hollow. This was unusual behavior for a species that had gained their seat on the council through their remarkable ability to find creative solutions to seemingly impossible diplomatic problems. The humans had joined the Galactic Council only 47 standard years ago, making them one of the newest members. Their planet had been discovered by a routine Zephyrian survey mission, and first contact had been established through careful, patient negotiation. What surprised everyone was how quickly the humans adapted to galactic politics, and how effectively they could mediate disputes between species that had been enemies for millennia. Sarah Chen had been one of the first human ambassadors, and her reputation for finding middle ground in impossible situations had made her legendary. She once resolved a 3-way territorial dispute by suggesting the contested system be turned into a mobile trading post belonging to no one and serving everyone. The solution was so elegant that it became a template for similar conflicts across the galaxy. But now, Sarah sat like a statue, her hands folded, her face a mask of polite attention that revealed nothing. When the Crystalline Collective's representative directed a question toward the human delegation about their position on mineral distribution protocols, she answered with a simple, "The human delegation abstains from this discussion." Counselor Thane of the Hegemony found this behavior puzzling. The massive, bear-like species had always respected human ingenuity, even if they found their emotional nature somewhat unpredictable. Humans had helped negotiate the Hegemony's non-aggression pact with 3 neighboring systems, saving countless lives and resources. For them to suddenly become passive observers seemed wrong. The session continued, but more and more representatives began to notice the unusual silence from the human corner. During the afternoon break, several counselors approached the human delegation, but their attempts at casual conversation were met with polite but distant responses. "Is everything well with your people?" asked Ambassador Cordelia of the Merchant Guild, her tentacles writhing in a pattern that indicated genuine concern. Sarah looked at her with those unreadable dark eyes and said, "Thank you for your concern, Ambassador. Everything is as it should be." The response was technically polite, but it carried an undertone that made Cordelia's skin change color involuntarily. Something was wrong, but she couldn't identify what. As the days passed, the pattern continued. The humans attended every session, participated when required, but offered no initiatives, no creative solutions, no passionate speeches about justice or cooperation. They had become ghosts, haunting their own seats. The other species began to realize how much they had come to depend on human input. Without their unique perspective, debates dragged on endlessly. Problems that would normally be resolved through human mediation festered and grew more complicated. The energy of the council itself seemed diminished. 3 weeks into this strange behavior, Counselor Zarthuk of the military caste made an observation that chilled several representatives. "They are watching us," he said in his deep, rumbling voice, "not participating, not engaging, just observing and recording." It was then that Ambassador Mel Andra of the Scientific Consortium noticed something that made her crystalline structure flicker with alarm. "Their data collection has increased by 300%, she reported to her colleagues. "Every session, every debate, every private conversation within range of their sensors. They are documenting everything." The realization spread through the informal networks that connected the various delegations. The humans were not simply being quiet. They were studying the council with the intensity of scientists examining a specimen. On the final day of the session, something unprecedented happened. As the council prepared to adjourn for the quarterly recess, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood up. The chamber fell silent, as it always did when she spoke, but this time the silence felt different, heavier. "The human delegation will not be returning when the council reconvenes," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber without need for amplification. "We withdraw from all current negotiations, all ongoing projects, and all future commitments. Effective immediately, humanity's participation in the Galactic Council is terminated." The chamber erupted. Representatives from dozens of species began speaking at once, their translator units struggling to keep up with the flood of questions and protests. Sarah Chen waited patiently for the noise to die down, then continued. "All human assets contributed to joint council projects will remain as gifts to the collective good. All shared technologies will continue to be available under existing agreements. We will honor all current trade contracts until their natural expiration." Counselor Prime Ket Hai of the Unified Worlds, the current rotating leader of the council, managed to make himself heard above the chaos. "Ambassador Chen, surely this can be discussed. What grievance does humanity have? What negotiation has failed? We can resolve any issue through proper channels." Sarah Chen looked at him with an expression that would haunt his dreams for cycles to come. It was not anger, not disappointment, not even sadness. It was something far worse. It was the look of someone who had made a decision that could not be unmade. "There is no grievance, Counselor Prime. There is no failed negotiation. There is no issue requiring resolution." Her pause seemed to last forever. "This is not about what has happened. This is about what will happen." And with that, the 3 human representatives gathered their minimal belongings and walked out of the chamber. They did not look back. They did not respond to the calls that followed them. They simply left. The silence that filled the chamber after their departure was unlike anything the council had ever experienced. It was not the comfortable quiet that came between speakers, nor the tense hush that preceded important announcements. It was the silence of a vast machine suddenly missing a critical component, the quiet that comes when something essential stops working. In the human section of the space station, their quarters were already empty. The humans had apparently packed and prepared for departure before the session even began. Their staff, their support personnel, their cultural attachés, all gone, as if they had simply vanished into space. The last shuttle to leave the station carried the human delegation away into the darkness between stars. It did not file a flight plan. It did not respond to traffic control. It simply accelerated toward the edge of the system and disappeared into hyperspace. Behind them, they left only questions, confusion, and a growing sense of dread that no one could quite explain. The council had been abandoned, and somehow that abandonment felt less like an ending than a beginning. In the weeks that followed, as various species tried to make sense of what had happened, one phrase began to appear in private communications between delegates. They knew something we didn't. The question that haunted them all was simple and terrible. What had the humans seen that the rest of the galaxy had missed? The silence they left behind was not empty. It was full. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 72 hours after the human delegation's departure. Representatives from all major species gathered in the Great Chamber, their usual assigned seating disrupted by the conspicuous emptiness of the human section. The three chairs sat like open wounds in the carefully orchestrated arrangement of galactic diplomacy. Councilor Prime Ket High called the session to order with unusual speed, bypassing the traditional ceremonies that typically opened council meetings. The unified worlds had taken the human departure as a personal failure of leadership, and the pressure from his own people was mounting. The first order of business is establishing contact with the human government, Ket High announced, his four arms gesturing in patterns that indicated barely controlled frustration. Ambassador Thane of the Hegemony, your people have the most extensive communication networks. What is your status? The massive Ursine representative stood slowly, his expression grim. All standard diplomatic channels to Earth have gone silent. Not blocked, not rejected, simply unresponsive. It's as if the entire human communication infrastructure has been simultaneously deactivated. A ripple of concern passed through the chamber. The humans had always been meticulous about maintaining open communication lines, even during their most difficult negotiations. Ambassador Cordelia of the Merchant Guild raised her tentacled form. My traders report the same phenomenon. Human colonies and outposts that were active just days ago are now broadcasting automated messages directing all inquiries to local authorities only. No new trade agreements are being accepted. Existing contracts are being fulfilled, but barely. The Zephyrian delegation, led by High Commerce Minister Veltar, interjected with typical directness. This is clearly a negotiation tactic. The humans seek to improve their position by creating artificial scarcity of their participation. We should ignore this theatrical display and continue council business. But Dr. Yilmoth of the Scientific Consortium had been analyzing data since the humans left, and her findings painted a different picture. Her crystalline structure flickered with agitation as she addressed the assembly. The human withdrawal was not spontaneous, she announced, her voice creating harmonic overtones that demanded attention. Analysis of their data collection patterns over the past 6 months shows a systematic gathering of information on every species' military capabilities, resource allocation, political stability, and strategic weaknesses. They have been preparing for this moment since before the Kepler sector mining dispute began. The chamber fell silent. The implications were staggering. If the humans had been planning their departure for months, then their recent passive behavior hadn't been disengagement. It had been intelligence gathering. Counselor Zarthuk of the military caste stood, his scarred face showing concern that his warrior species rarely displayed publicly. My analysts have reached similar conclusions, but the pattern suggests something more troubling than simple withdrawal. They have been mapping our responses to crisis scenarios, testing our decision-making processes under stress. For what purpose? Demanded Ambassador Flex of the Synthetic Collective, her artificial voice carrying none of the emotional undertones that organic species couldn't help but express. Zarthuk's answer chilled the chamber. The same reason any military force conducts such intelligence gathering, to understand how an enemy will respond when attacked. The word enemy hung in the air like a toxic gas. The humans had never shown aggression toward any council species. Their entire diplomatic philosophy had been based on cooperation and mutual benefit. The idea that they might now view the galactic community as adversaries was almost incomprehensible. Ambassador Quindar of the Pacifist Alliance spoke in the gentle tones his species was known for. Perhaps we are misinterpreting their actions. Humans are emotional creatures. Perhaps they simply felt unappreciated or overlooked. We should send a formal delegation to Earth to... No. The interruption came from an unexpected source. Elder Morgeth of the Void Hunters rarely spoke in council sessions, preferring to observe from their species' traditional position in the shadowed corners of the chamber. When they did speak, their words carried weight earned through millennia of experience. The humans did not leave in anger, Morgeth continued, his ancient voice carrying harmonics that spoke of vast age and wisdom. Anger would have produced demands, ultimatums, explanations. They left in fear. Fear of what? Asked Counselor Prime Kethai. Elder Morgeth's next words changed everything. Fear of us. The chamber erupted in protests and denials, but Morgeth raised one clawed appendage for silence. Not fear of individual species, but fear of what we represent collectively. The humans have been studying us, yes, but not to attack. They have been studying us to understand what threat we pose to something they value more than galactic cooperation. As the days passed, and attempts to contact human worlds continued to fail, other disturbing patterns began to emerge. Trade routes that had been stable for decades suddenly showed increased security measures. Human merchant vessels were traveling in convoys with escort ships, something they had never done in council space. Most unsettling of all, human colonies were quietly evacuating their non-essential populations to locations deeper in human space. Ambassador Melandra of the Scientific Consortium made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the intelligence networks of every major species. The humans have been relocating their primary research facilities, she reported during a classified briefing. Advanced physics laboratories, biotechnology centers, weapons development programs, all being moved to systems we've never heard of. The realization hit the Council like a physical blow. The humans weren't just withdrawing from galactic politics, they were preparing for war. But against whom? The answer came from an unexpected source. A routine patrol by the Zephyrian Border Guard detected massive gravitational anomalies in the empty space between the galactic rim and the void beyond. The distortions were consistent with fleet movements on a scale that defied comprehension. Something was coming toward the galaxy, and it was enormous. The discovery was kept classified, while scientists from every species worked frantically to understand what they were seeing. The gravitational signatures suggested thousands of vessels, each one larger than anything in the Council's combined fleets. The formation was too organized to be a natural phenomenon, too vast to be refugees, and moving with the inexorable certainty of an invasion force. Deep in the classified archives of the Council's central computer, a junior researcher from the Andromedan delegation found something that changed everything. It was a communication log, automatically recorded but never translated or analyzed, from a human survey vessel that had been operating near the galactic rim 3 years earlier. The message was simple, brief, and terrifying. Contact established with entities claiming dominion over this galaxy. They are not interested in negotiation. They are not interested in coexistence. Prepare for war. Captain Sarah Chen, Earth Survey Vessel Pathfinder. Sarah Chen. The same Sarah Chen who had sat silently in the council chambers for months, watching and waiting. The same Sarah Chen who had led the human delegation out of the chamber without explanation. The humans hadn't abandoned the council in anger or fear or disappointment. They had left because they knew what was coming, and they had realized that the galaxy's greatest hope for survival lay not in the diplomatic solutions that had made the Council possible, but in the kind of desperate, unified military action that the Council's structure made impossible. When Counselor Prime Kethai was briefed on these findings, he made a decision that went against every principle of his species' diplomatic tradition. He authorized the release of all classified information to every council member, knowing that panic would be the likely result. The emergency session that followed was unlike anything in the council's history. Representatives who had spent decades building careful alliances found themselves staring at evidence of their own impending destruction. The mining rights dispute that had seemed so important 3 months earlier now appeared as absurd as children fighting over toys while their house burned around them. As the terrible truth sank in, the assembled delegates began to understand what the humans had seen so clearly. The council was designed for peace, prosperity, and cooperation between civilized species. It was magnificently effective at resolving disputes, managing trade, and fostering cultural exchange. But it was utterly unprepared for existential war against an enemy that viewed the galaxy as territory to be conquered rather than neighbors to be negotiated with. The humans had tried to warn them in the only way they could, not with words that could be debated, dismissed, or misunderstood, but with actions that spoke louder than any speech. Their silence had been the warning. Their withdrawal had been the alarm. Their quiet intelligence gathering had been preparation for the war they knew was coming. And now, as the reality of the approaching fleet became undeniable, the Council finally understood what human ambassador Sarah Chen had tried to tell them with her last words in the chamber. This is not about what has happened. This is about what will happen. The war was coming, and the humans were the only ones who had been preparing for it, of warning, dense with implication, heavy with the weight of knowledge that had driven an entire species to walk away from galactic civilization without explanation. And in that silence, something was waiting to be discovered. The invasion began exactly 73 days after the humans had walked out of the council chamber. It started not with weapons fire or demands for surrender, but with a transmission that reached every inhabited system simultaneously. The message was simple, delivered in perfect translation to every species' primary language. This galaxy now belongs to the Dominion. Resistance will result in extinction. You have one planetary rotation to prepare for occupation. In the council chambers, emergency sessions had been running continuously for weeks. The careful protocols and procedures that had governed galactic civilization for centuries proved utterly inadequate for coordinating a military response. Each species wanted to defend their own territories first, others argued for negotiation, and still others suggested evacuation to distant galaxies. The Zephyrians demanded immediate tactical command based on their technological superiority. The hegemony insisted their warrior culture made them natural leaders. The scientific consortium wanted time to study the enemy before acting. The pacifist alliance begged for one final attempt at communication. The debates that had once seemed like the pinnacle of civilized discourse now felt like the chattering of children while monsters gathered at their door. Counselor Prime Kethai watched the chaos unfold with growing despair. In the span of 3 months, the greatest diplomatic achievement in galactic history was crumbling into irrelevance. The very diversity that had made the Council strong in peacetime made it fatally weak when unified action was required. Then, the first wave hit. The Dominion forces emerged from hyperspace at the edge of 17 different systems simultaneously. Their ships defied every principle of known engineering. Massive beyond comprehension, they moved through space like living organisms, their hulls rippling with organic patterns that hurt to look at directly. They ignored all attempts at communication and began systematically dismantling the outer colonies. The attack was methodical, efficient, and utterly without mercy. Defensive fleets from half a dozen species were swept aside like insects. Planets that tried to resist were subjected to weapons that turned entire continents into glass. Those that surrendered were emptied of their populations, their people taken for purposes that no one wanted to imagine. Within 6 days, the outer rim of the galaxy was under complete Dominion control, and the invasion was accelerating toward the core worlds. It was during the darkest hour of the 7th day that the humans returned. They came not as diplomatic envoys or desperate allies, but as a military force that no one in the galaxy had known existed. The first sign was a massive gravitational distortion that appeared behind the Dominion fleet attacking the Zephyrian homeworld. What emerged from that distortion changed everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity. The human vessels were unlike anything they had built before. Gone were the elegant, efficient designs that had carried human diplomats and traders across the galaxy. These ships were weapons, pure and simple, built with the kind of focused intensity that only comes from knowing that survival itself is at stake. The largest vessel was over 15 kilometers long, bristling with weapons systems that combined human engineering with technologies that no council species recognized. Its hull bore simple markings in human script: Terra's vengeance. But it wasn't just one ship. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace numbered in the thousands, organized into battle formations that moved with the precision of a military force that had been training for exactly this scenario. They struck the Dominion fleet with tactics that were simultaneously familiar and alien, human ingenuity applied to methods of warfare that the peaceful council species had never needed to develop. The communication that followed was broadcast to every council world simultaneously. Ambassador Sarah Chen's voice, calm and steady as it had been during her last appearance in the council chambers, reached across the galaxy. To all council species under attack by Dominion forces, humanity stands ready to assist in the defense of galactic civilization. However, we will not repeat the mistakes of the past months. Military command will be unified under human authority. All participating forces will follow human tactical doctrine. Species that cannot accept these terms are free to continue their own defense efforts. The message was clear, direct, and utterly without diplomatic niceties. It was also the galaxy's only hope. One by one, the council species swallowed their pride and accepted human authority. The Zephyrians, watching their homeworld's defense fleet crumble before Dominion weapons, were the first to formally request human assistance. The hegemony followed, their warrior culture recognizing the efficiency of human tactics, even if their pride rebelled against accepting outside leadership. Within days, every major species had placed their military forces under human command. What followed was a transformation of galactic military doctrine that revealed just how thoroughly the humans had been preparing. The scattered, individualistic fighting styles of the council species were reorganized into coordinated battle groups. Human commanders, who had been studying detailed intelligence on every species' capabilities for months, deployed their new allies with devastating effectiveness. The Zephyrian technological advantage was focused on developing new shield systems that could deflect Dominion energy weapons. The hegemony's warrior culture was channeled into specialized boarding parties that could fight the Dominion forces in close combat. The scientific consortium's analytical capabilities were used to identify weaknesses in Dominion ship designs. Even the Pacifist Alliance found a role, managing refugee evacuation operations with an efficiency that saved millions of lives. But it was the humans themselves who provided the crucial edge. 3 years of secret preparation had produced not just ships and weapons, but a military philosophy perfectly adapted to fighting the Dominion threat. Where other species saw an overwhelming enemy, humans saw a problem to be solved through determination, innovation, and sacrifice. The battle for the galaxy raged for 18 months. It was brutal, costly, and desperate. Entire star systems were lost and retaken multiple times. The Dominion forces proved to be more adaptable than anyone had expected, learning from their defeats and developing new weapons to counter human tactics. But the humans had one advantage that the Dominion couldn't match. They understood the true nature of the war they were fighting. This wasn't a conflict over territory or resources. It was a battle for the very concept of diversity itself. The Dominion sought to impose their singular will on the galaxy's countless species, while humanity fought to preserve the chaotic, inefficient, magnificent diversity that the Council represented. The turning point came during the Battle of the Nexus, when a Dominion command vessel attempted to take control of the galaxy's central communication hub. Human Admiral Elizabeth Santos, commanding a joint fleet of 7 species, made a decision that became legendary. She ordered her flagship to ram the Dominion vessel at maximum velocity, detonating her ship's reactor at the moment of impact. The sacrifice of the Terra's Vengeance and its crew destroyed the Dominion command structure and turned the tide of the war. But more importantly, it demonstrated something that no council meeting had ever achieved: perfect trust between species working toward a common goal. When the last Dominion vessel was finally destroyed above the ruins of their forward base, the galaxy fell into a silence that was completely different from the one the humans had left behind 18 months earlier. This was not the silence of abandonment or warning, but the quiet that comes after a storm passes and the survivors begin to count their losses. The reconstruction took years. Entire worlds had to be rebuilt, populations relocated, and governments reestablished. But something fundamental had changed in the galaxy's political structure. The Council reconvened, but it was no longer the same institution that had debated mining rights while oblivious to the threat gathering at their borders. The new Galactic Charter included provisions that the old Council would never have considered. Military cooperation was no longer voluntary but mandatory. Intelligence sharing became a requirement, not a courtesy. And most importantly, any species that detected an external threat was required to share that information immediately, even if it meant abandoning diplomatic niceties. The human delegation returned to take their seats in the chamber, but the dynamic had changed completely. Sarah Chen, now bearing the scars of battles fought in the void between stars, addressed the assembly with words that would be remembered for generations. "We withdrew because we knew that democracy is precious, but survival is more precious still. We spoke with silence because sometimes the most important truths cannot be expressed in words. We prepared for war because we understood that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice." She paused, looking around the chamber at representatives who had learned the hard way that their greatest strength could also be their greatest weakness. The Dominion saw our diversity as chaos to be eliminated. We knew it was our greatest weapon if we could learn to wield it properly. The Council exists to celebrate our differences, but it must also be prepared to unite them when the alternative is extinction. In the years that followed, the galaxy grew stronger and more unified than it had ever been. The Council learned to balance its love of debate with the need for decisive action. Species that had been suspicious of each other for millennia found common ground in their shared survival. And humanity, no longer the newcomers seeking acceptance, became the guardians who watched the void for signs of new threats. The silence that had once seemed like abandonment was finally understood for what it had always been: the quiet before the storm, the held breath before the battle cry, the moment of preparation that meant the difference between extinction and victory. The humans had left without speaking because sometimes actions speak louder than words. Their silence had been their warning, and their return had been their answer. In learning to read that silence, the galaxy had learned to survive.